If Lance is clean, it is the greatest comeback in the history of sport. If he isn't, it would be the greatest fraud. A three-time Tour de France champion said those words to a newspaper reporter in the summer of 2001. According to a sworn deposition, the man he was warning the world about called his house a few weeks later and told him there was no way he had won his own tours without EPO. And 11 years after that, the president of cycling's world governing body stood in front of the cameras and said, "Lance Armstrong has no place in cycling." Rewind to July 29, 2001. On the Champs-Élysées in Paris, Lance Armstrong is being crowned champion of his third straight Tour de France. That same morning in London, the Sunday Times prints a warning from the only American who had ever truly won this race: the comeback or the fraud. One sentence, holding both futures. So how does the one man alive qualified to judge an American miracle say it out loud, in plain English, and watch the whole world look away? And what does it cost to be right 10 years too early? That is exactly what we are here to find out. To understand why that warning carried weight, start with the man who gave it. Greg LeMond grew up outside Reno, Nevada, a kid from the high desert who found European road racing the way other American boys found baseball. In September 1983, at 22 years old, he won the World Championship road race in Altenrhein, Switzerland, and became the first American ever to pull on the rainbow jersey of professional cycling's world champion. 1 year later, he signed the first $1 million contract in the history of the sport, 3 seasons with La Vie Claire, the team of the French businessman Bernard Tapie, at a time when no rider on earth had ever been paid close to that. In 1985, he finished second at the Tour de France behind his own team leader, the 5-time champion Bernard Hinault, after being told to wait on the climb to lose Ardiden. That same season, he took silver at the World Championships, 3 seconds short of a second rainbow jersey. His team told him the gap behind was about 45 seconds. It was minutes. "They lied to me," he said afterward. The next July, Hinault attacked him day after day anyway, and LeMond answered in the mountains and beat him by 3 minutes and 10 seconds. July 1986. The first American and the first rider from outside Europe to win the Tour de France. He was 25 years old, and the sport belonged to him. 9 months later, he was lying in a California field, bleeding to death. On April 20th, 1987, on a family property near Lincoln, California, LeMond's brother-in-law Patrick Blades fired at what he thought was a turkey. Roughly 60 shotgun pellets tore into LeMond's back and side. 2 stopped in the lining of his heart. He lost blood so fast that only a helicopter, reaching the field within the hour and flying him to a trauma center in Sacramento, kept him alive. Some 35 pellets would stay in his body for the rest of his life. 27 months later, he stood on a start ramp in Versailles for the final stage of the 1989 Tour de France, a time trial of 24.5 kilometers into Paris, 50 seconds behind the race leader, Laurent Fignon. LeMond rolled out on triathlon aero bars the traditionalists had laughed at, wearing a teardrop helmet, and rode the fastest time trial the Tour had ever seen, more than 54 kilometers per hour, 26 minutes and 57 seconds. Fignon, on a conventional bike ponytail in the wind, lost 58 seconds. After 3,285 kilometers of racing, Greg LeMond won the Tour de France by 8 seconds. Read that again. 8 seconds, the closest margin in the history of the race, from a man carrying shotgun lead beside his heart. That fall, he signed the richest contract the sport had ever seen, $5.5 million over 3 seasons, and Sports Illustrated named him Sportsman of the Year, the first cyclist ever chosen. He won the Tour again in 1990 without taking a single stage. Then, in December 1994, his body quit on him. Doctors called it mitochondrial myopathy, and he retired at 33. Greg LeMond did not read about comebacks. He wrote the greatest documented comeback this race has ever produced. So in the summer of 2001, when a new American miracle was being crowned in Paris, he was the one man alive with the standing to weigh it. On July 8th, 2001, the Sunday Times of London published an investigation by the journalist David Walsh. It revealed that Armstrong had been working, quietly and for years, with Michele Ferrari, an Italian sports doctor then awaiting trial for supplying doping products to riders. Ferrari was the man who had once told a reporter that EPO was not dangerous, only its abuse was, because drinking 10 liters of orange juice was dangerous too. Asked directly whether he had visited Ferrari, Armstrong answered with one word, perhaps. 3 weeks later, on the very day Armstrong sealed his third straight tour, Walsh printed LeMond's response. When Lance won the prologue to the '99 Tour, I was close to tears. But when I heard he was working with Michele Ferrari, I was devastated. And then the sentence this whole story hangs on. If Lance is clean, it is the greatest comeback in the history of sport. If he isn't, it would be the greatest fraud. The reply came by telephone. According to the sworn testimony of Kathy LeMond, who listened to the call and wrote notes afterward, Armstrong told her husband, "We've all done EPO," and warned that he could find 10 people to testify that Greg had used it too. And according to sworn affidavits later filed in the case, Armstrong told dinner guests that summer, "I'm going to take him down," adding that one phone call to the owner of Trek, the company that built and sold LeMond's bicycles, would be enough to shut him up. 2 weeks later, LeMond issued a written statement he would regret for a decade. "I sincerely regret that some of my remarks seem to question the veracity of Lance's performances." The record book would eventually side with the warning. It would take 11 years. First, it would take almost everything Greg LeMond had. What happened across those years was not a feud. It was a system, and 3 scenes are enough to see how it worked. July 2004. LeMond tells the French newspaper Le Monde, "There are no miracles in cycling, only explanations," and says Armstrong is ready to do anything to protect his secret. That same month at the Tour itself, an Italian rider named Filippo Simeoni, who had testified in court against Dr. Ferrari, slips into a harmless breakaway. Armstrong, wearing the yellow jersey, personally chases him down and refuses to leave until Simeoni drops back, then turns to the television cameras and zips his lips shut. All he wants to do is destroy cycling. Armstrong says of him, "Destroy the sport that pays him." Scene 2. Dallas, 2005 into 2006. An insurance company called SCA Promotions withholds a $5 million tour bonus and drags the question under oath. Betsy Andro, the wife of Armstrong's former teammate Frankie Andro, swears that in an Indiana hospital room in 1996, she heard Armstrong list for his doctors the substances he had used: growth hormone, cortisone, EPO, steroids, and testosterone. Armstrong, under the same oath, denies it 100% and testifies, "I race the bike straight up fair and square." The case settles, and he collects $7.5 million. Scene 3. Malibu, May 2007. The night before LeMond is due to testify at Floyd Landis's doping hearing, his phone rings. The caller pretends to be his uncle and uses details of the sexual abuse LeMond had suffered as a boy, a secret he had confided to almost no one, to frighten him off the witness stand. The number traces back to Landis's own business manager. LeMond walks into the hearing the next morning anyway, reports the call, and says as out loud, for the first time in his life, what had been done to him as a child. "It nearly destroyed me by keeping the secret," he tells the room. The manager is fired on the spot, in front of the cameras. 3 scenes, 3 witnesses, 3 warnings buried in real time. Now count what the burying cost. After the forced apology of 2001, LeMond later said, "People from Armstrong's camp told him to keep quiet, and he did for 3 years. Silence did not save him." His bicycle brand, licensed to Trek since 1995, had grown from nothing into $9.5 million a year in sales. After the Le Monde interview, Trek asked him to find another partner. In April 2008, the company cut him loose entirely, and its president, John Burke, said it in public. For years, Greg LeMond has done and said things that have damaged the LeMond brand and the Trek brand as a whole. After years of trying to make it work, we are done. Burke himself had told the trade press that with everything aligned, the LeMond name could have been a $35 million brand. Instead, it went to zero. The lawsuit that followed was settled in February 2010 with a single public term, a $200,000 donation to a charity for male survivors of childhood sexual abuse, the cause LeMond had been forced to represent in the cruelest way imaginable. The man himself simply vanished from his own sport. "I only did 4 interviews in 8 years, he said later. "Even at the Tour de France, I wasn't welcomed." His wife Kathy closed the ledger in 3 sentences. "We lost our income. We lost our company. Greg lost his reputation. And while the LeMonds were losing all of it, America was buying the other story." 80 million yellow wristbands sold, by most estimates. 1.7 million Americans watching the final stage of the 2005 Tour, a record for the network carrying it. Road bikes jumping from 16% to 28% of American specialty bike sales in 2 years, with the same sponsor's name on the frames, Armstrong Road. Understand this clearly. The sport did not fail to hear Greg LeMond. It heard him perfectly and decided he was bad for business. "He took a good 10 years out of my life," he would say when it was finally over. In the spring of 2010, the end of the lie quietly began. On April 30th, 2010, Floyd Landis, stripped of his own tour title and done with lying, emailed American cycling officials and confessed everything, naming Armstrong page by page. Federal prosecutors investigated for 2 years and walked away. The United States Anti-Doping Agency did not. On August 24, 2012, Armstrong declined to contest the charges and was banned from the sport for life. On October 10th came the evidence, more than 1,000 pages, sworn testimony from 26 witnesses, 11 of them his own former teammates. Travis Tigert, the agency's chief executive, described the most sophisticated, professionalized, and successful doping program that sport has ever seen. 12 days later, the president of cycling's governing body, Pat McQuaid, spoke the sentence that opened this story. Lance Armstrong has no place in cycling, and 4 days after that, the record was corrected in the strangest way a record book can be corrected. Not reassigned, erased, not 1, not 3, but 7 Tour de France, 7 yellow jerseys, reduced to blank lines because the era was judged too poisoned to name a substitute. In January 2013, Armstrong sat across from Oprah Winfrey and answered yes and yes and yes. Banned substances, EPO, blood transfusions, all 7 tours. He called his life one big lie that I repeated a lot of times, a mythic, perfect story that was not true, and admitted that the day his sponsors fled had been, in his own words, a $75 million day. 2 years after the confession, an arbitration panel ordered him to pay $10 million for lying under oath and wrote 5 words that stand as the verdict on the entire era. Perjury must never be profitable. 11 years after a warning printed in a Sunday newspaper, every word of it stood proven. Greg LeMond still carries around 35 lead pellets under his skin, and he left the sport with a body that stopped cooperating at 33. Most people watching this still ride, closer now to his age than to his youth. The Sunday group ride, the same climb chased a little slower every season, and the ache that follows it home, the knees, the lower back, the hands that go numb on the drops. It is the legend's price, collected from the rest of us in smaller coins. Recent research points to an explanation for that kind of pain in longtime riders, specific and almost never discussed in this sport. This video is not the place where it gets explained. It has its own. It sits pinned as the first comment under this one, and it asks for nothing but a few minutes before your next ride. LeMond never got to choose when his body sent the bill. Anyone still riding does. So why did nobody listen? Because the warning was expensive and the myth was profitable. And for 11 years, almost everyone with power in this sport ran that arithmetic and chose the myth. Today, the correction stands. The record book of the Tour de France shows 7 blank years, and above them, 1 American name with 3 titles beside it. Greg LeMond, once again the only American ever to win the Tour de France. His bicycle brand returned to the market in 2020. That December, the United States Congress voted him the Congressional Gold Medal, honoring him, in the words of the law itself, as an athlete, activist, role model, and community leader. And in July 2025, he finally held it, under the dome of the Capitol. He had already written the ending years before in a single line. I always believe what goes around comes around. It just takes a long time sometimes. The decade never came back. What came back was the truth, printed where the titles used to be. If stories like this one deserve to outlive the men who tried to bury them, subscribe and follow the next one. Then tell us in a comment which truth teller this sport still owes a story. Somewhere on a quiet road, the only American winner of the Tour de France is still riding a bicycle that carries his own name.